So now we have the next workshop, which is on suspicious activity reporting and how to do it properly. So presenting this workshop today is Mercedes Nieto of Bitcoin Suisse, Jean Canzanella and Alessandro Pulvirenti of the MROS, the Money Laundering Reporting Office of Switzerland.
Okay. I think we'll see here, right? That's it. Do we have? I think we'll see here. For the slides? Do you want us to? Sure we can. Yeah. Do you see the slides? The slides? Yes, we have slides. We send slides, yes. Thank you. So, good afternoon and welcome to today's workshop called The Art of Filing SARs. My name is Mercedes Nieto, Head Regulatory at Bitcoin Suisse, and today, together with our colleagues Jean and Alessandro from MROS, we will provide you with some insights for AML professionals. So let us start with some foundational knowledge. Here we go. So what is our duty as VESP? We have Article 6 AMLA, where we have the duty to investigate the background and the purpose of transactions, one, and also business relationships in case there could be a kind of illicit activity. This is the starting point. Can be that maybe there is a transaction monitoring alert, or the relationship comes and says, oh, this client somehow behaves differently, or you have other indications. Then you do this deep dive, you do this special clarification. That means you do adverse media checks. You see, in general, also public available resources if you find something. But also in crypto, the most important, you do this blockchain analysis with the according tool. And based on that, then you write a report, a summary based on the factual situation, and you decide, is there a real suspicion that the assets or the according transaction or business relationship could have somehow a link to an illicit activity? If so, if you have a reasonable suspicion for that, then we need to report. We need to report in that sense that we need to submit a suspicious activity reporting or a suspicious transaction reporting to the Money Laundering Reporting Office Switzerland, MROS. And this is absolutely an obligation we have. And what is a SAR? It's basically an electronic notification you submit through the GoAML tool. This is the starting point. Now, we need to make a distinction between the duty, the obligation to report, and the right to report. So there is the obligation to report in case we know or there are reasonable grounds to suspect that this business relationship or this transaction is linked to somehow an illicit activity as described here. So what are reasonable grounds? I mean, it's a wide term. Can be, in general, it's not a full proof, but it's more than just vague suspicions or kind of not grounded suspicion. We also need to report that even if we don't have established a full client relationship. That means, for example, you start with the onboarding, you do your compliance due diligence checks, and then you see adverse media, oh, there was maybe a sentence regarding this client or the data related to this client. Also, these kind of cases need to be reported. Then, in general, when you do your due diligence checks, your client reviews, but also in case internally you see that there was a suspicion, an unusual behavior, that you based on the facts, you really can describe that there is a realistic suspicion that these assets are linked to an illicit activity, then you report. However, sometimes there are also cases where you don't have a sentence or a letter from a prosecutor or something like that, or a real clear case. In such cases where this case is a bit shady, I have an indication, but it's not enough to report an Article 9 AML, we have still the right to report based on Article 305 der Swiss Criminal Code. And this is often a discussion. In that sense, it's a 9 or a 305 term. It's not always crystal clear. We take as reference that a reasonable person with the according experience and knowledge, would the person see that case as suspicious? That's a bit the indication. Let's go for the crypto cases. What are the typical crypto cases we need to report? For sure, investment fraud. This is one of the most common cases we need to report. Typically is that you have scams related to pig butchering at the end, all these tricks, these fake profiles, these fake platforms. What we also know from TradFi, but now with crypto. Most of the cases are related to victims which are vulnerable people. So they really know who are the victims. Another part is theft, misappropriation of cryptocurrency assets. That means maybe somebody has a wallet with a private key, and this private key, through the fraudster, gets manipulated, or they share the password login for the online account, and then from one day to the other, all the crypto assets from the wallet are gone. This happens, unfortunately, also often. Suspected use of crypto assets in connection with illicit drug trafficking. This is a bit more difficult and doesn't happen so often. Where you see it, most of the cases related to that, it's that the client has from one day to the other another kind of transaction behavior, or in particular wants to have a third-party transaction settled in his account. Then you do your due diligence check, and then you see, okay, on the blockchain, on whatever, there are some links maybe to people involved in drug trafficking or similar. Source of funds is a big topic also there. It's possible to have several cases that maybe people don't report from the beginning all their source of funds. Can happen sometimes, and indications are also if people, when you do your due diligence checks, adverse media check, pop up in general that court sentence regarding corruption or similar was given. And of course, suspected tax offenses. For example, you have a client declared to be a non-US person. 3-4 years later, so you do a renewal of the full documentation, and then he says something else. And then the process starts. Exactly. Investment fraud, what's a scam? We don't need to look at that in detail. However, the typical case is online communication. So the fraudsters, they really know how to get these victims. But not only. What we have seen in the last time, in particular for a group of elderly people, they go to the bridge club in person. They pretend to be crypto advisors, and then they get their victims. Fortunately, that happens. And typically it's promises of high returns, fake platforms. They say you invest 10,000 and get 1 million back. We know all that this is a trick, but people in special situations believe that. They always go for the victims, for these vulnerable people. And why is this? Why do this scam harm victims and also the VASPs? Of course, they lose a lot of money, better said, crypto, and this usually cannot be recovered. But it's not only the money, it's also often they are so transparent that they share the full documentation, identification theft, so their identity will then be reused for other scams. Happens also, and this re-victimization is also a big topic. Okay, these people are extremely stressed, they maybe lost their full pension funds, or they were already at the limit, they don't have nothing. And in these cases, they say, okay, I'm a professional lawyer, a professional advisor, I help you to recover these funds. And then it gets even worse. But also for WESPs, this is a really sensitive situation, and for the whole industry, because this is kind of leads to a lack of trust in crypto, in technology, in the financial institutions in general. And also for reputational reasons, it is, can be a topic. For example, if it becomes public, even if the WESP hasn't done anything, has done everything right and reported. Here you see a list of these typical vulnerable people. I spoke about elderly people. Why? Because we have seen a lot of such cases in the last time, but not only old people, also young people can be affected. In general, it comes to when people don't have the according knowledge about crypto. A typical case, and that's how the structure of a SAR filing can be. You have a client profile, the source of wealth, and the transaction behavior. The transaction behavior is almost the most important. Then it's important to stick to the facts, to have a good overview, and to summarize that. That's what you do when you do a special clarification. Transactional behavior, in such a case with these elderly people, they made several deposits. Here, 400,000. Then they bought Bitcoin. And then, from a completely inactive profile, they start to withdraw in tranches their Bitcoins to their private wallets. And for WESP, it's extremely difficult sometimes to detect that in time, because you have maybe your transaction monitoring with your rules, but they know what they do, and they don't usually withdraw 5, 15, 25, where maybe also your system would recognize that. So, and it's extremely difficult for WESPs also to intervene here, because usually you see it often. These are questions you then can raise to BIT-C. Is there a real suspicion or not? As, for example, the transactional behavior, has this person been doing that in the past? Are there any indications? You maybe speak with your relationship managers, you check the documentation, you do adverse media checks, and based on that, you come to a conclusion. And this conclusion then, it's summarized in a special clarification where you decided and a report, and then it's submitted to MROS. And with that, I'm happy to hand over to MROS.
Thank you, Mercedes. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon as well from my side. I will present today alongside my colleague Jean the art of filing a SAR from an MROS point of view. Today's goal is to highlight the importance of having qualitative suspicious activities reports, and we'll give you as well some tips which will help you drafting them. But first of all, let's start with a short introduction on what is MROS. I'm sure you know about it, but it's good to remind that we are an administrative authority, that we are managed by the Federal Police Department. We are Switzerland's central money laundering office, receiving then the suspicious activity reports, and we deal as a filtration point between, on the one hand, the financial industry, the financial intermediaries, and the law enforcement authorities. That's exactly what we're not. We are not a law enforcement authority. We are not a supervisory authority, and we do not apply coercive measures. In 2025, we are around 60 to 65 people working for MROS, divided into 6 sections, as you can see from left to the right. The planning and policy section dealing with all legal and policy making matters. The preliminary analysis team is the team collecting and processing all incoming SARs. Then you have the two operational teams dealing with the in-depth analysis of the reports. You have the data management and strategic analysis team, which are, among others, responsible for our information system tool GoML, and the international division dealing, among others, with international exchanges with foreign financial intelligence units. Let me quickly show some statistics. As you can see, every year we receive more and more suspicious activity reports. Last year it was more than 15,000, which means it was an increase of around 30% more than in 2023. This trend is the same even this year. We have already received for this first period of year more than compared to the same period of last year. There are several reasons for that. On the one hand, there are better understanding of money laundering issues, better awareness, and on the other hand, financial intermediaries have as well better or improved tools for transaction monitoring or internal analysis. And as you can see on the left side of the screen, transaction monitoring is the main factor arousing suspicion, leading to reports. When you draft a report, it's important, or it's very helpful when you indicate the predicate offense that you suspect. As you can see, in 1/3 of the cases, this is not the case, and I can assure you this makes everything more complicated. The main ones was fraud. This has been the case last year, but as well in the previous years. So we received last year 15,000 reports, more than 90% of them from the banking sector. It's important to highlight the fact that we have introduced a new category in our GoML system, which is the WASP FinTech category. Last year, 30 financial intermediaries registered in it and submitted 227 suspicious activity reports. Even if we haven't received that many reports from WASPs, it doesn't mean that we receive many virtual asset related SARs, and this, as you can see on the figure, increases every year as well. We work with our information system GoML, which is something we encourage you to use as well, because this helps you to draft and submit in a very efficient, quick, efficient, and in a secure manner reports to MROS. To do so, you just have to fill out this little form that you can find on our website, and as soon as you get confirmation, then you can start using it. And another very important point, you will get updates from MROS, such as newsletters and other important information. Once you have drafted and submitted the report, we will receive them, of course, and our preliminary analysis team will perform the first checks. We'll check that you have sent all necessary attachments to the report, and you will get a confirmation receipt, as you can see on the screen. Please be informed that since we have very high number of reports that we receive, we use a risk-based approach that we have developed, consisting in prioritizing and the cases, and we focus on serious crimes. The operative teams receive then the reports that you have submitted, and we have many tools at our disposal to perform this operative analysis. We have the police databases, which give us very interesting information. We use crypto tools as well to detect the sources of funds. We can exchange information with Swiss authorities as well as with foreign financial intelligence units. And if we see a link to other reporting entities, other Swiss financial intermediaries, we can ask them for information as well. Once we have all this information, the operative analysis is done, which is combined then with a strategic, broader analysis that we perform, and we create, in that case, a very important piece of intelligence. Once we are done with the whole analysis, if we have reasonable grounds for suspicion, we can transmit the case to the prosecution authorities. And at the same time, we inform the reporting entity that this has been done, unless the reporting entity has interrupted the business relationship with the client. When we inform the reporting entity, they have to freeze the assets for a maximum period of 5 days. If they have to freeze it for a shorter or longer period, then this is something they have to discuss, or you have to discuss with the prosecution authorities directly. Finally, if we don't have suspicion, reasonable grounds for suspicion, we do not notify any prosecution authority, but this doesn't mean that the report is not used from our side. As I said, we can share information with our Swiss authorities, we can share information with foreign financial intelligence units, and in any case, this will feed our GoML system with important intelligence, and this will help us as well in future to link such reports with other reports that we'll get and create some clusters. With that, I'm done, and I'll give a hand over to Jean.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everybody. So let's start with some suspicious activity reporting tips. Maybe saying that crypto is not always universal knowledge. So, for instance, for a crypto expert who has a technical background, it may be very straightforward to talk about a cross-chain swap or DEX. But for someone who has no technical background, sometimes it becomes harder to assess the risk of a situation. So I would say that it's always a compromise between being precise, both precise and accessible. But at the same time, crypto world and traditional finance work in with two different assumptions. So sometimes, for instance, it's very different in crypto world for freezing funds, and it's always good to clarify. Maybe just an example that will illustrate some challenges is one typology that was featured in last year's report. In this instance, okay, we observed stolen credit card that were used to purchase Bitcoin through an app, and typically under know your customer threshold, so without the identification of the customer. So virtually you have a lot of report with low amount, low materiality, virtually no link with Switzerland and no clients. But what's interesting is no client identification. But what is interesting is that it's not because you don't have the name of someone that you can work with other data. For instance, financial intermediaries such as VAPs sometimes collect IP addresses or type of mobile phone. And with that, it's a source to cluster several reports, several transactions together. And you can as well leverage blockchain intelligence. For instance, okay, those credit cards were linked to that IP address. And okay, if we follow the money, in instance, we observe that the funds were routed to one address. And in this address, there were like hundreds of other deposits, the amount being really higher and showing a pattern of serial crime. So, but it's also possible to trace back that to, if it was possible to trace back that back to financial intermediary. So what I want to say here is that it's not because there is no old data that we have usually, such as the client name. It's also possible to work with IP addresses or with phone numbers or what is available. Now maybe when filing a suspicious activity report, about the importance of giving context. For instance, if a fraudster wants to buy Bitcoin with Swiss franc, he will deposit those Swiss franc in a Swiss bank account. But this Swiss bank account is linked to a VASP, who is held by a VASP, that may have a client, another virtual asset service provider, who is in turn linked to the end client, the fraudster. And in this constellation, you may have 4 different jurisdictions involved. And when submitting the report, it's a good practice to explain the context of the business relationship. For instance, for us to understand which jurisdiction we have to approach in order to follow the money. Another tip that was mentioned in the last newsletter is when submitting a report, it's always good to protect the source of this report. For instance, the name of the compliance officer, if it's mentioned in a supporting documentation, it's always good to redact it. Okay, but transactions. We are in financial intelligence unit, so our core job is to follow the money. And our system, GoML, is built around transactions. So it's always good to recall all the suspicious transactions which help up uncover, for instance, networks. And now, okay, with Bitcoins, we understand that this is different because it's UTXO, but it works differently. But in this instance, Excel files are perfectly acceptable as long as we have all the informations. And as well, we have a suspicious activity report based on blockchain alerts, for instance, because of the tool, a chain analysis, or something else, identify a risk. And if this is part of a suspicious activity report, it's always a good practice to provide the graphs and an interpretation of this graph, not just here is it. We have, if someone is interested, I don't know how many compliance officers there is here, but if you're interested, we have a small guide who helps recording in GoML some account or type of transaction, and we are happy to share it with you. It's not published, but it's available. All right, so maybe to sum up, the goal is always to have, finally, we have different parts of a picture. We have small report, and the goal is always to cluster that in a bigger picture. And something that's very important, as mentioned by Mercedes before, is the clarifications. So it may help, for instance, turn a simple transaction pattern, financial pattern, in like actionable intelligence, because a compliance officer actually, sometimes we see really work of art. I mean, really big investigation made by compliance where they clarify with client and make a big on-chain analysis and so on. And yes, I will maybe as well mention that it's always good to indicate the predicate offense. And yes, with that being said, here are some contact details. If you want to register in GoML, please don't hesitate to take a picture of that. And we are always available should you have any question for reporting, being technical or just in general. Thank you. I think it's the slide. Is there any question for any of us?